All right, let's jump right into the sources you've shared for this deep dive. We've got quite a mix today. Editorial, opinion, science, and text sections.
Yeah, good spread.
We'll go through each one, kind of pull out the main ideas and see how they fit together. So kicking us off is the article from the editorial section, Exposomics, Environmental Health and Disease Prevention.
This one, it really sets a strong context straight away, doesn't it? It uses the World Environment Day focus on plastics, but makes a much broader point.
Right, that microplastics are just, well, one small part of a huge landscape of hazards.
Exactly. Thousands of chemical, physical, biological things around us, stuff we often can't even sense, let alone measure easily.
And that gets to the core problem it raises. How do you actually tackle the disease burden from the environment when it's all so complex? It points to places like India, too.
Where rapid economic growth means these exposures are increasing, becoming more complex. And the statistic is pretty stark, India carrying nearly 25% of the global environmental disease load.
Yeah, that's huge. And the piece argues our current ways of looking at this, these sort of piecemeal approaches.
Focusing on one or two things at a time?
Right. Using basic health indicators, it says they're just not cutting it. Not only underestimating the real burden, but maybe even skewing our view of health inequities.
Making them look worse, potentially. Yeah.
So what's the solution it's pushing for, this idea of exposomics?
Exposomics, yes. And the article defines it pretty clearly. It's about measuring everything, all the exposures someone encounters over their whole life.
And connecting that to their health, how they relate.
Exactly. It's a big shift from older studies that might just look at, say, air quality at one point in time.
I like the goal it mentions creating this kind of atlas. An EWES, Exposure-Wide Association Study.
That's it, like GWAs for genetics, but for exposures.
Yeah.
Mapping how everything external, physical, chemical, biological, even psychosocial stuff, diet, lifestyle.
How all that interacts with our internal biology, our genes, physiology, epigenetics.
To ultimately shape whether we're healthy or end up with a disease. Understanding that whole interplay.
And that complexity is why it critiques things like the global burden of disease estimates.
Right. It says the GBD, while useful, is limited. It only includes, what, about 11 environmental risk categories?
Because the data just isn't there for the rest.
Yeah, it's missing so much. Complex mixtures like those microplastics, solid waste, chemical cocktails, noise.
And critically, the article stresses these risks don't just add up simply. They interact
with our metabolism, our behavior, our genes, our socioeconomic situation, often in synergistic ways. Current models, they just don't capture that lifelong dynamic.
Then you layer climate change on top of that, which the article presents not just as another risk, but a multiplier.
Definitely. Making hazards like heat, air pollution, vector diseases worse. Fueling storms, wildfires.
Affecting food security, mental health. Creating these compound events where multiple things hit at once.
And those complex, synergistic impacts, often not fully baked into the current GBD assessments either.
So it all leads to this conclusion that our current environmental burden numbers are probably way too low. Conservative underestimates.
And Exposomics isn't just, an interesting research idea. The source positions it as really necessary.
To bring environmental risks into the mainstream of public health.
Exactly, to build better prediction models, move towards precision public health.
And it flags this as especially crucial for places like India, facing those high burdens and complex mixes. But it's not easy.
No, it calls for serious investment in surveillance and biomonitoring, using digital health tools, boosting data science.
And crucially, building ways for data to be shared effectively, an ecosystem for it.
The whole idea of a human exposome project, it suggests, could be fundamental for truly holistic prevention, looking at the whole web, not just single strands.
It's a really different way of thinking about environmental health. Okay, let's shift from that environment focus to energy. The second source from opinion, India's energy transition, the BESS imperative.
Yeah, this one starts by rethinking energy security. It's not just available, accessible, affordable anymore.
It has to be environmentally acceptable too, that fourth pillar.
Which is where renewables come in, obviously. They tick that box and support goals like SDG 7 for clean energy.
But the big but with renewables.
Intermittency, yeah. The sun goes down, the wind stops blowing. That makes grid integration tricky.
Which leads directly to the core of this article, energy storage. Specifically, battery energy storage systems, BESS.
And it argues BES isn't just helpful, it's critical for the energy transition.
Makes sense. It helps stabilize the grid, integrate those big renewable projects reliably.
Provides power when you actually need it. The article highlights the plus points: cost, scalability, speed of deployment, and you can basically put them anywhere. Geographically flexible.
And looking at the grid itself, BES seems fundamental. Balancing supply and demand, managing peak loads.
Cutting emissions from the power sector by enabling more renewables. Plus, supporting those decentralized microgrids, getting power to more people.
And the cost drop is pretty amazing. Nearly 90% in 15 years. That changes the game.
It does. But the article is also realistic. There are still hurdles.
Regulatory stuff. Technical challenges.
Yeah, regulatory, technical, financial, market issues. They're slowing things down.
Especially in India's context, which is the focus here. India's got that huge 500 gigaW non-fossil fuel target by 2030.
Huge target. They're making progress over 217 gigaW by Jan 2025. But to really make that work and keep the grid stable, they need BESS deployment to speed up. Significant.
They have a BS target too, right? 47 gigaW by 2032.
And the government's trying things. Viability gap funding, waiving some transmission charges temporarily.
But the article, citing the economic survey, says progress is, well, slow.
It points to specific bottlenecks. Lack of investment in grid upgrades needed for storage. Big customers not adopting BESS quickly enough.
Access to critical minerals for making batteries domestically.
That too. And delays in getting these big BESS agreements finalized, so it calls for focus, innovation, investment right in those areas.
So how do you scale it up then? What's the proposed path forward?
Innovative partnerships seem key, bringing together public money, private investment, maybe even philanthropy.
To provide funding and techno help, especially for the early projects.
Exactly. And it mentions that Delhi pilot project, BSES, Rajdhani, Indigrid, GEAPP.
That's meant to be more than just installing batteries, right? It's a learning exercise.
Yeah, creating a technical playbook, informing regulation, showing it works to encourage others, a step towards that national 47 GW goal.
So the takeaway is, India's renewable push is great, but true energy security needs BES to manage the intermittency.
Absolutely. And scaling that means partnerships, finance, tech support, building local manufacturing, thinking about recycling, all of it.
Get BESS right, the article implies, and India could really lead the way for emerging economies on clean energy.
It's about managing the clean power, not just making it.
Okay, total shift now. Let's dive into the third source from the science section. The brain's intentional chain. When action precedes awareness.
This one tackles a really fundamental question. Sort of a classic philosophical puzzle, but now through neuroscience.
The chicken or the egg of intention. When you decide to move, does your brain start the process before you feel like you decided?
Exactly. Is the feeling of deciding the trigger, or does it come after the brain's already in motion?
It mentions the history here, Benjamin Libet's work in the 80s on the intentional chain.
Intent, action, effect.
And even earlier, Kornhuber finding that readiness potential back in the 60s, brain activity building up before the conscious decision.
Right. That earlier work hinted activity came first. But this new study, Knoll et al., it had a unique way to look at the whole chain.
How'd they do that?
They worked with a tetraplegic participant who had an implant in their primary motor cortex, M1, for a brain-machine interface. And they used electrical stimulation, NMES, to actually cause the hand movement based on the brain signal.
Wow, okay, so the brain signal directly controls the movement via stimulation.
Precisely. The setup was, participant intends to squeeze a ball, brain signal triggers NMES, hand squeezes, then a sound plays shortly after, and the participant reported, using a clock, when they felt the intent, the action, or heard the effect.
And the focus was on M1, the primary motor cortex.
Yes, because that's the final output station for voluntary movement signals. And they found something surprising there.
Which was?
M1 wasn't just active before the voluntary action, like maybe other areas are, but it was also active during the action itself, which, as the article notes, kind of makes sense for the area actually executing the command.
Okay, but the really intriguing part is the timing perception, right? How did the subjective feeling line up with the objective brain and muscle signals?
That's where it gets wild. In the normal voluntary sequence, the participant felt their intention to move before the M1 activity ramped up in the recordings, and they felt the movement start before the NMES signal was actually sent.
So perception came before the measured neural and physical events in that case.
It seemed to, subjectively, but then they changed things. When they just triggered the hand movement with NMES without the participant's voluntary intent driving it.
Then what happened?
Then the perception of movement came way after the NMES signal, a significant delay.
Okay, that's different. And what if movement was blocked?
If they intended to move, but the hand couldn't, They perceived their intention much earlier than when the movement actually happened in the first condition.
These are tiny time differences, milliseconds, but clearly significant for brain processing.
Hugely significant. The article links this to intentional binding, how we normally perceive actions and their effects as closer together in time than they are. But this study suggests maybe a new kind of binding between the intention and the action itself.
And it reinforces that idea that timing depends on where you look in the brain.
Absolutely. M1, being that final integrator and executor, shows this unique pattern active before and during, different from areas further upstream.
Now, this was mainly one participant with a very specific setup. Does it generalize?
Good question. The source mentions a follow-up, Nature Communications, with 30 healthy people using scalp electrodes. And apparently it supported these findings about M1's role in timing. Adds credibility.
So this gives us a much more detailed, maybe more complex picture of that intentional chain. The timing of awareness versus brain activity isn't straightforward.
Not at all. Especially highlighting M1's specific role in translating that intention into action and how our perception plays into it.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, one more piece from the text section. Beyond global warming, prioritizing climate disaster action.
This one throws out a provocative question right at the start. Are we maybe too focused on those global mean warming targets like 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius?
Is it becoming a distraction? That's the angle.
Yeah. It sets up the context. Paris Agreement targets, climate science, often framing things against those levels. But then it immediately questions the certainty of long-range climate models.
Because they depend on guessing future emissions, population, policies, things we don't really know.
Yeah, right. And it argues the specific numbers themselves, 1.5 versus 2 degrees, might be less critical than we think. Suggests the 2-degree target was a bit arbitrary, rooted in old economics.
And the core argument is that whether the global average is 1.5 or 1.75 or 2, that difference doesn't really change what we need to do today to manage climate disasters.
Exactly. It mentions the recent fuss about possibly hitting 1.5 degrees temporarily, the different estimates, how warming rates fluctuate, finds focusing on those global averages confusing when the uncertainties are so large.
So what should the priority be, according to this article?
Action on the ground now. Adaptation and resilience, which need huge investment, yes, but crucially, they need reliable local information to work. Otherwise, you risk maladaptation.
Investing in the wrong things or wrong places.
Precisely. So while mitigation cutting emissions is vital, the article frames the intense focus on distant global temperature goals as potentially diverting attention and resources from immediate local adaptation needs.
The real urgency, it says, is for predictions on shorter timescales. Days, weeks, maybe out to a decade or two.
And at a hyper-local level. Because disasters, heat waves, floods, droughts are happening now, more often more intense, lasting longer. The losses are mounting.
And knowing the global average temperature doesn't help a specific community prepare for their specific flood next week.
That's the point. Unless you can say which disaster where with enough lead time to act, focusing on the global mean isn't helping manage the immediate crisis.
It does acknowledge progress, like better early warning systems, the UN initiative.
But stresses the need for better decadal predictions, too, for longer-term planning. The overall message is shift the focus to tracking actual disasters, being prepared, managing them, and recovering practicalities.
And it pushes back on just blaming global warming after an event happens.
Yeah, says that's less useful than asking, was the forecast any good? Did people get the warning? Did the emergency plans work? It calls for documenting failures in forecasting and preparedness, learning from mistakes.
So it ends with a call for agency, really, saying climate risk isn't just some fixed number out there. We can actively reduce risk through better preparedness and response.
And that requires prioritizing local, actionable information over those big, distant global targets.
It's definitely a perspective that challenges the common narrative. You know, looking across all four of these articles, Exposomics, BESS, the brain's timing, climate action priorities, there's a fascinating common thread.
I see it too. They all seem to push back against overly simplistic views, right? Against relying on just one number or one factor.
Exactly. Exposomics says health isn't just about isolated pollutants, it's the whole interacting web. BESS shows renewable energy needs smart storage to handle the complexity of intermittency.
The brain study reveals intention isn't a simple switch, but this intricate timing dance between brain areas and conscious feeling.
And the climate piece argues effective action now means local preparedness, not just fixating on global temperature decimals. It's a consistent call for more integrated, data-rich, actionable approaches.
embracing the complexity, basically,
Yeah.
and focusing on what we can actually do based on the best available, often localized information.
So here's something for you to consider as you go about your day. In the complex challenges you face, whether personal or global, how often might you be getting fixated on a single number, a simple explanation, or a distant, perhaps abstract goal?
Hmm.
And what critical details, interactions, or immediate actions might you be missing by not taking a truly integrated multi-factor approach focused on tangible progress and adaptation?
It's definitely food for thought, drawing from all these different areas we discussed.
Thank you for listening. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We're always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about.